And as you know, this is one of the special lockdown shows. We've been bringing you some of the best local fiction and literature. And tonight is not any different. In fact, we've actually upped our game, I think. So as I said, a lot has been going on around us. Lockdown has been extended, but at the same time, we need to keep in mind that we are alone together. There's a sense of solidarity. There's a lot going on where, community drives are happening. Salam Media and various organizations are doing so much in a sense of solidarity. And this is just one of those things where us book lovers and writers are getting together to give you a real sense of what's out there. Tonight's guest, I have extreme pleasure in interviewing. Qaanitah Hunter is a household name in South Africa and globally as well. She's an award-winning writer and political journalist. She has a long accolade behind her, and I want to get as much in through the program. We've got the time. But at the same time, she's written an extremely powerful text that we're going to also talk about, which documents the rise to presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa, not necessarily his biography, so to speak. The book is called Balance of Power. And Qaanitah, before that, wrote a fascinating piece of fiction called Diary of a Guji Girl, which she is also extremely well known for. So, wearing multiple caps, I'm about to introduce to the show multiple award-winning author, political journalist, senior reporter for the Sunday Times currently. She won the Vodacom Journalist of the Year award twice in a row. She's won the very prestigious Net Nikasa Award just last year, possibly the youngest journalist to do that. And for Diary of a Guji Girl, she won the inaugural Minara Aziz Hassim Literary Award, which was an absolute pleasure and delight to see. Qaanitah, welcome to Book Bites. It's such an extreme delight and pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's a long journey from the time we had our first conversation about Gucci Girl until now.
And I remember back then, I mean, there was so much of hype and excitement. Obviously, you had already taken your first steps into the world of journalism, whether it was radio journalism, print journalism. You were doing a lot of that as a student journalist as well. And that blog was something that you said, tell us about that blog. So that, I mean, 2 million in a couple of months. Tell us
So,
about the start.
so today I was reminded by so many avid fans over what that blog, which was a very simple, almost simplistic in some way, blog that would go post that would go out once a day or a few days a week, and what it meant to so many people's teenage life, as it meant to my teenage life. I was a young journalist. I was working. I just stepped out into political reporting at the time, and so I started writing this blog about this girl, completely fiction, fiction, and had no resemblance to my life. But somehow this character got so much of gravitas, and so many people found themselves in this character who was mostly lost and trying to find a way. So that was an interesting experience, because I was definitely not a good writer. I definitely, didn't have much experience writing fiction or any experience writing fiction. And there I was writing these little posts and sending them out to, tens of thousands of people reading it every day, to the point
Right.
where it was then published into a book, which was now, what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? Six
Yes,
years ago.
yes. 2015. Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember you were writing into mobile, right? And then most of the readers were reading it off their mobiles as well. So you were like one of the first Moby read bloggers who phenomenally, like it's like wildfire, such a phenomenal reader show
Yeah,
on that blog.
that taught me so much about social media and the role that it was going to play, because it was obviously, not at, or probably it was at its peak at the time, but it was still in its formative stages in terms of
Yes,
what you could use social media for. And I think
right.
that using it as a platform to share fiction was a very new thing, at least in South Africa. And so the type of following is that, were people that wouldn't necessarily, um, you know some most of my readership were not book lovers,
Right.
which was really an interesting thing. And to get people to read and to also, prompt people to share stories and to write stories, I think that was probably the biggest positive that has come out of Guji Girl is that it created a culture of people sharing their work, people sharing their writing, and also just getting a culture of people reading. And till today, I mean, this is what, Guji Girl started in 2013. It's 2020,
Okay. Right.
and there are people who, who at the time were reading it were in high school or whatever. They now, one girl messaged me and she's like, she's a doctor, and when she read
Oh
it, she
goodness.
so people sort of grew up,
And there's
but
a
this character.
nostalgia about it.
Yes, there's this nostalgia about it. Even now, when I decided to share the link to it, and I thought it was just nice now during the lockdown to sort of, democratize it a little bit, let people read on their phones. And the feedback that I literally thought it was redundant and that, it had its moments. Also because the world has changed so much, the social medias, the society has changed so much
Right.
in these last 6 years. I mean, back when we wrote Kushi Girl, Instagram wasn't what Instagram is. The influencer culture wasn't influencer culture. So the internet was a completely different world. And
Right.
now it's so different, yet so many people still resonate with the character or also want to be reminded of a place they were at in their lives when they read
Yes.
it.
Yeah, so that's definitely linking to the nostalgia. And at the same time, when I hear you speaking, I remember the process because when we spoke about taking blog to book, back then I remember saying that was when books were still a bigger thing. And now blogs are a bigger thing. So in fact, it was about taking your blog and trying to get a different readership. Whereas now I think you've got a wider readership if you're writing online.
Yeah.
And I have to say, back then as the publisher, I have to remind readers that in the first weekend, in the first 3 days, we sold out at 500 copies. We did a test run of 500 copies, and from that Friday to that Monday, we had like no copies left. So it was
Mm.
such an amazing experience for you as the writer and for us as the publishers as well.
But
Um,
the thing is, Shafinaaz, at the time when I mean, how old was I? I was about 19 or 20 years old, and during that process of writing was obviously so scary in a lot of ways because you're putting yourself out there in a way that people start questioning your own belief system, start questioning your own viewpoints and certain things, even though it's repeated so often that it's a work of fiction. But the
yeah,
experience of that had really developed me, not only in terms of, I've not only grown up during that process of writing Gujikal, but I
yeah.
also that's so much of nostalgia. I remember when we decided on the cover, it was amazing.
I know I'm showing in selfie mode, but I've got to just go on, go on. We want to
No.
hear about your process.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that not only did I grow as a writer, but I also grew as a person in this time. And I thought that's probably the most therapeutic thing for me at that time, was to just, all these crazy nuances that continue in the world and persist, to just write it even in a in a way that's fiction. Until today, I still find myself amid, the political reporting and writing my second book, which was Balance of Power. I still gravitate to this sort of cathartic way of writing fiction through someone's story.
So do you find when you're writing, obviously the deeply researched material, that the fiction helps you maybe to re-engage the muse, or does it keep you sane?
No, so both, right? So fiction for me is almost like a coping mechanism, which is a very weird thing because people have friends, and I have these characters that live in my phone that I pursue their personalities every now and then. So when I was writing about the president, that experience of writing fiction and putting it out there some years before kind of helped me in the sense of trying to sort of humanize ideas and constructs that are often very vague and ambiguous. So to humanize it, to sort of bring it down to someone, And I thought that was the most important thing when writing about, political transition, was that, politics and often hang somewhere, away from your life. People sort of don't realize how human it is. And so by bringing that sort of two worlds together, it kind of helped me quite a bit, not only humanizing the subject, but also the events, and detailing the events and how they're linked together in a way that was compelling, at least.
And I think it's appreciative that you're making this level of politics tangible to a lot of readers, accessible to a lot of readers. But at the same time, balance of power is not a hagiography. It's not even really Cyril's story, Cyril Ramaphosa's story. And so tell us about that motivation, because it's tempting. It's tempting to want to just go write the story because you're writing about
Yeah,
a very intriguing and interesting personality as well. Tell us
absolutely. I
about.
think Shafina's, the interesting bit for me was not to document the man, because there's been a lot written, and actually adequately so, about Cyril Ramaphosa, his rise from the trade union movement to the ANC, to business, to back to the ANC. So that was already written, and also there are, people who have sort of followed him, and had done a better job than me. What I sought to look at, and I thought it was important to reflect at a time in South Africa's history that was probably going to be lost because of the pace at which things were happening at the time. So basically, the decline of the Jacob Zuma era to the rise of the Cyril Ramaphosa presidency, and what that actually meant and how it came about. And I thought that was very important, because I felt that things were happening at such a accelerated pace. I had a front row seat as a political reporter, reporting on both the Zuma years and the Ramaphosa presidency. So I was able to take people almost inside what had happened, and
Yes.
or what was actually unfolding. And I mean, till I wrote the final chapter, things were still moving at such an accelerated pace, and that was both a positive and a negative. But the very important thing was to say, okay, all of this has happened. We have a new president, but actually, what really happened? And that's what I attempted to do, to bring together compelling storytelling, but with also deep, meaningful, and almost investigative writing.
I find that a lot of political books, and you say rightly so, that there's a point where this is rolling, and a book is almost a doorstop. It's not a doorstop, but so to speak, it has a point where it stops, and you know that life is still carrying on. Um, you write this book, and a lot of political books are written where someone's just put articles together, but yours goes well beyond that. You obviously refer to facts that you've drawn from, but this is a live document in many ways in its own right. And I want you to talk to that and this concept of Zuma Mina, because you talk about reporting on the Zuma presidency and you talk about following Cyril's presidency. And every one of us, laypersons watching, citizens, know Zuma Mina to mean the brand of Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency. But there's a kind of, a thing
Yeah.
that you discover about that.
So to take two steps back, Shifin, as you mentioned about, a lot of political books being compilation of articles, and it's very tempting to do that, especially the fact that I was, at the forefront. I've been writing a lot of these articles. It was very compelling, very attractive to put together a whole lot of articles and put it out in the public domain. But I realized that it doesn't add too much of value, in the sense that people are bombarded with so much of information and so much of news all the time, that sometimes it just takes a little step back to be like, oh, what, this happened, but actually what was happening. And so you raised the point of the Tuma Mina, and I thought that anecdote symbolized what I actually wanted to do with the book, is to say, okay, we now have a president whose literal slogan when he talks about a coronavirus is Tuma Mina, this concept of send me, invoking the words of the late Hugh Masekela. And so I kind of try to track the genesis of that a little bit, and to find out where did it originate, what was the thinking around it, only to
Okay.
realize that there was a story about this nameless speechwriter, and I thought it was so fascinating to get his voice into the narrative about Ramaphosa, to almost depicting a bigger story about his presidency, that it was actually an accidental slogan, something that his aides and his advisors were actually not so keen on. And this sort of low, this nameless, faceless speechwriter was so uh, enamored by the words of Hugh Masekela, inserting it in the speech, and then when Ramaphosa eventually reads those words out at the State of the Nation, at his first State of the Nation address in 2018, it then just sticks, and almost 3 years later, or 2 years later, it's now his slogan.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then this concept of so many new ones have come up. Ramaphoria, because I can think of it being currently also a very Ramaphoric kind of space when we've been thirsting for leadership in very uncertain times.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so the discourse around, I wouldn't call it a cult of leadership quite yet, but the discourse around who Cyril Ramaphosa is, how he
mm,
came to be, the lessons that he's learned along the way.
yeah,
Because currently, one of the comments that have been constantly coming up when anyone speaks positive of him in his current dimension of working through the state of disaster is that, well, he has skeletons in his closet, which there is no politician that doesn't. And one of the things that keep coming up is Marikana. And, the thing is that Marikana was a huge lesson at the same time, and possibly a way of preparing Cyril the man for the
mm,
presidency that he is currently, the difficulty that he is currently having to balance right now. What would your
yeah.
comment on that?
The one criticism I get about the book is that people believe that it's not definitive in its in whether Ramaphosa is a good guy or a bad guy, and I don't believe that we can look at politics through the nuance of black and white. What I do say, however, and what I do explore is how the Marikana moment of 2012 actually propelled him to back into politics, and not by his own doing, by the doing of people who now are considered as his enemies, as
Okay.
he was regarded as a deputy to Jacob Zuma at the time, because he had the credibility of his years in business and his proximity to former President Nelson Mandela. But then he had this, so it was very deliberate, and politicians years later, now when I wrote the book, kind of confirmed this, that actually the allure of making him Zuma's deputy at the time was that he had this sort of skeleton in his closet, and he wouldn't have dared to contest Zuma, or Zuma's proxy. But then history takes a different route in 2017. And he challenges for the presidency, and then he is successful, and then Jacob Zuma is removed from office, and then he's installed as president. So I think in the analysis of Ramaphosa in this particular crisis, which is the COVID-19 crisis, I think
Yeah.
that we have to steer clear of this really binary black or white. He's a good guy, and these are bad guys. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
Politicians make good decisions and bad decisions, and sometimes a good decision can be marred, or could be muddied with bad experiences. So it's very important to look at the nuance. So in the sense of Ramaphosa in this case, and I'm answering like a politician, Shafinaaz, but
It rubs off.
in this scenario is that the man can be commended for making a very, very good decision, to be inclusive in his decision making, consulting broadly, effectively, sort of propelling South Africa as a leader among developing nations as to how to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. But at the same time, there are little things obviously that would persist. So whether it would be his administration's lack of a clear financial recovery plan, whether it's the fact that his own ministers were violating the lockdown. So there's all of these side issues. But I do think that the Ramaphoria construct came from the fact that South Africa had reached rock bottom under former President Jacob Zuma, and there was the only way was up. And I think that before this COVID-19, I'm saying scandal, I'm so used to talking about scandals, this crisis, there was almost a sentiment that said Ramaphosa sort of and his administration had sort of you know what is the word I'm trying to find? They squandered the optimism that came in his presidency, and I think that this crisis that's at the world and South Africa is facing at the moment has given him an opportunity, like he had in 2018 when he took office, to reclaim that optimism and then to actually live up to expectations.
Well, he certainly has. I mean, he's dealt with so much of integrity, and he's pulled together so many sectors, so many groups, and what a trial to be able to prove one's sort of potential in a way. And it's also that we're thirsting for good leadership in a space where people are multi-traumatized. We talk of everyone experiencing a kind of constant grief, understanding the rightness of an extended lockdown, but at the same time, there's this
The
despair and
trauma,
there's
the empathy.
a sense of
Yes,
uncertainty. Yeah,
yes.
it's not an easy time at all sectors and in every way. And the changes that have happened, I mean, so much has happened in a rolling space of the last 3 weeks. But I think his constant updating and his being there sort of accessible to the nation in terms of giving information is also very reassuring. And yeah, and I certainly hope that people go out and read Balance of Power because I found it very, very, extremely well written, extremely thought provoking. And I hope you're working on something beyond that as well. What are you working on?
So back to our initial discussion point about making stories, especially stories about people of color, and just sort of tiny stories about our lives and our societies and how we exist in a broader South African context is something that has always been attractive to me, and I also have now, having had both experiences, so doing the fiction and the non-fiction, I am, and obviously Balance of Power, the readership of Balance of Power is very different to Guji Girl. Obviously, I mean, there have been some overlaps, but so now I'm trying to explore the trying to make writing a lot more accessible to people, and I don't know if the way we do that is by taking writing, so making the traditional publishing process a little bit more accelerated and a little bit more easier to access, especially as a young writer, where I'm not trying to be uh I don't know, Jane Austen. I don't know, I'm not trying. You understand what I'm saying? So it's not so much about the literature as it is about the storytelling. So I'm trying to understand that whether we need to kind of create a platform for more writers to put out good quality work that's available at the touch of a button. And I mean, this is just an idea that's literally was
Yes.
born in my head this morning, and I've just been thinking about it constantly.
When we spoke earlier, you started the conversation talking about the democratization of literature. And I know earlier you mentioned to me off air that you are now making Diary of a Guji Girl available to readers in e-format, which is fantastic because it just means you're re-evoking the nostalgia of those who had bought and read the book, but you're also making it accessible now, firstly to people who are in lockdown, and I really believe, there's a lot more access to e-commerce, e-books, the
Yeah.
.mobi format and the EPUB format, and you'll definitely see yourself reaching a whole range. And I don't even think you can put it down to age because Diary of a Guji Girl was just so accessible to anyone who wanted to pick
Yes.
it up and
Yeah.
be entertained by the read and get to know your characters through that. So it'll be interesting to see how the next few weeks unfold when people download that book from you and probably bring feedback to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a social experiment. I mean, it may work, it may not work, but I'm very keen to see what does this mean in terms of just writing going forward, or what is the appetite for people from like, of people to read, stories that are not, that are just diverse and unique in its own way. And so that's currently where I'm at the moment. um Obviously, the way we also consume media in terms of the way we consume media in terms of just newspapers versus online is also a telling example maybe how we could sort of move storytelling. And at the end of the day, we are just storytellers, and so yeah, that's where my mind is. I'm hoping to use this lockdown very productively, inshallah, and to not only write, my daily stuff or the Sunday stuff that I write, that appears in the Sunday Times, but also to use the time to write a little bit of fiction. So I'm not promising anything, Shafinaz, but who knows what can happen from this lockdown.
So then I'll have to send occasional WhatsApps, just at 2 a.m. in the morning, and see how you're doing, and just kind of like poke and prod.
To be
But you
like,
never know. You never know.
yeah,
Lockdown will just produce something that surprises you, outside
absolutely.
of your work-related deadlines and that sort of thing. It would be really, really a pleasure to see more fiction from you, because not only for your own sanity's sake, but I think that you have created a thirst in your readership in different streams. And it'll be really wonderful to see what comes up. We're getting some comments from Facebook. So Najiba Deshmukh says, awesome watching and listening to two amazing ladies. Thank you so much for listening. Humaira Vahid from Oman says, the two women powerhouse. That's very, very kind. Awesome discussion, ladies. And
Thank you.
Rashida Khan says, balance of power was well researched and easily accessible to everyone, not only for academic or political readers. And I completely agree with that. Thank you, Rashida, because it is an accessible read. It's a very tangible read, and it's a very relevant read if you're a South African, especially, and you just want to pick up this book and follow the trajectory of Mr. Ramaphosa's coming into presidency and understand where he is right now and what he's doing in a very crucial time.
Yeah, it kind of forces me to continue following the man and then doing an assessment at the end of his career or end of his presidency, whenever that may be. So we'll see
Absolutely.
where that project ends up. But for now, I really 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 think that there's so many interesting stories that we can be telling, and that we must just optimize this time. So the other thing that I've learned about this lockdown is that because people are missing human. I mean, I know I am. I was telling you before we went live that my body is in shock that I'm not in contact with as many people as I usually am.
Okay.
We're trying to we're finding solace in characters. And so I mean, I really will not be surprised if people who are not readers will emerge from this lockdown as readers.
Are you saying finding solace in characters that you're reading or characters that you're creating?
Well, both. I mean, for me, it's characters that I've been creating. But I mean, it's always a running joke in my house that that I have these imaginary friends, and then I write their stories. I gossip about them in my
Yes.
notes. But I mean, I find it to be extremely cathartic and just exciting in a way to live vicariously almost through characters and write about things that you probably wouldn't have experienced, maybe just observe socially. And also, I made a point on Instagram not long ago about love stories, and I'm a sucker for a good love story. And I've been promoting or kind of advocating for people to share their love story. So whether it's an 82-year-old lady who was introduced to her husband on Friday, and then she married him on Sunday, and then they've now been married for 60 years. I feel like
Oh,
it's
wow.
so I feel like it's so important for people to start sharing their love stories, A, to appreciate, obviously, but more
Yes.
importantly, to broaden the narrative and the landscape to believe, especially for young girls mostly. I mean, in my mind, that's how to believe that there's not a singular way of love and life.
Yes.
And that the stereotype or the cliche of chiclets or romantic comedies or what love supposed to be, of this pretty girl meets this pretty guy, a handsome guy, and they
Boy
fall in
Meets
love and
Girl.
they live happily ever. Yeah. And I feel like you can turn that on its head in a way that still celebrates something that's such an integral part of all of our lives. And I've been motivated by this series that the New York Times has put out now. It's short stories, but they've also do a podcast called Modern Love, where ordinary people write about their love stories. So it may not even be love stories in the way that we understanding love stories to be the sort of trashy or whatever construct of what we're thinking a love story is. It's a story about a woman and her and this magnetism she has for her grandmother, for example, in terms of love stories. But I just feel like that this time has really proven to us how important people and human connections are,
Yeah,
and and
absolutely.
and what an amazing time to just celebrate it and to explore it really.
But are we going to look forward to either through your formal journalist workspace or your own blog, having something of a collection of anthology online of this sort of thing? Are you going to encourage people to send their stories in? I would
I'm
love to
not there
read.
yet.
I know
I'm
I'd
not
follow
there
it.
yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. But I hope I mean, I'm playing around with ideas. I mean, the idea of the modern love, what the New York Times did in terms of doing like a podcast, for me was super fascinating as well. But I obviously prefer the spoken word and I mean the written word, and so that it's brewing in my mind. I think I'm sharing too much, that more than I should be. But I mean, that's just something that's really been brewing in my mind. But obviously, we also like to seek escapism a little bit in what we read, and so I think also to tell these stories that are probably not typical in any ways, or just a little bit out of your immediate social circle or your reality is always
Right.
good. It's always good to share, and I think that maybe or maybe not there'll be something coming on my personal platforms.
So I look forward to that. I hope this conversation actually gives you further impetus and formalizes all of these wonderful ideas. And I think lockdown is going to be productive as long as it takes, not as long as the lockdown takes, I mean, as long as the production of new material takes.
Hmm.
It'll be really wonderful. And I'll encourage readers and writers out there to keep up with us. I've been given the timestamp, and it's been so wonderful. I know you and I can continue for a good time
2 hours.
onwards. So hopefully we'll have another opportunity. Thank you so much for sharing your process, for giving us your time, and for giving readers a sense of how it works, and especially for handling my sort of more intrusive questions as well. Thanks again, Qaanitah.
I really
And
appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Alhamdulillah. I mean. And there you have it. We heard it from Qaanitah Hunter, the fun side, the fiction, but also the deeply pressing issues that she speaks about and that she writes about. Um, we hope to hear more from Qaanitah in the future, inshallah, and I hope that you'll be able to get hold of the digital copy of Diary of a Guji Girl if you haven't already read it. Reread it if you've got your copy at home, and definitely read Balance of Power, about the rise to the rise to presidency of Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Thanks again. Please tune in on Wednesday this time at 8 o'clock on Book Bites with Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.